They say the coldest nights are not measured by the wind, but by the silence of a home that no longer wants you inside. On an autumn evening, Ethan Monroe learned this truth in the harshest way. He was only 15, carrying the quiet weight of a secret heart. A boy who filled his notebooks with sketches, not of landscapes or superheroes, but of another boy from his class. Innocent lines of pencil, fragile as whispers, yet powerful enough to shatter the fragile illusion of safety he had at home. When his father stumbled into the room, drunk on more than alcohol, the world collapsed. The papers fell to the floor. A rough hand snatched one, eyes narrowed. Then came the roar, "You are filth. You are broken." And before Ethan could draw a breath, the fist landed, a crack of knuckles against cheekbone, and the boy's vision blurred. He tasted iron on his tongue. His chest heaved, not just from pain, but from the brutal confirmation that who he truly was, would never be enough for the man who should have loved him first. Ethan ran, his shoes slapped against the cracked pavement, torn sneakers barely holding together. The hoodie that clung to him was thin, riddled with holes. No match for the slicing wind. Each street lamp flickered like it might burn out at the very moment he passed beneath it, leaving him to the dark. His fists were buried deep in his pockets, not for warmth, but to hide the trembling he could not stop. His breath fogged the air. His ribs ached with each step, but still he kept moving, as if the night itself were chasing him. By the time exhaustion pulled him down, he had crossed into streets he did not recognize, blocks of silence where even dogs did not bark. His legs buckled, and he sank onto the porch of an old wooden house. The boards groaned under his weight, as if testing whether to hold him or let him slip through. Behind the door lived Miss Clara Thomas, a widow who had spent her life in quiet dignity inside the same home for half a century. That night, she heard the faintest sound, something between a thud and a whimper. When she opened the door, she saw a boy collapse on her steps. His face was bruised, his lips cracked, his eyes hollow but still clinging to a fragile spark. She could have turned away. She could have closed the door, but instead she knelt beside him, her hand trembling as it touched his cold skin. Clara whispered the words like a prayer, words meant not only to guide him inside, but to keep his spirit tethered to life itself. "You cannot die out here. Come in, before the wind steals your soul." In that moment, Ethan Monroe stepped over the threshold, leaving behind the home that had rejected him, entering a stranger's house that would one day become something more than shelter. It was the first flicker of proof that family is not always blood, but the ones who choose to see you, even in your darkest hour. And as Ethan's fragile body sank into the warmth of Clara's home, the story began that would one day return to this very porch. Not with a broken boy, but with a man whose name the city would cheer. If you believe these stories like this matter, stories of rejection, survival, and unexpected love, don't forget to subscribe to Heart Stories, because the journey of Ethan Monroe has only just begun. The first night Ethan Monroe slept on Miss Clara Thomas's old sofa, he did not dream of fists or the cold pavement. He sank into the worn cushions as though they were the softest bed he had ever known. The quilt that covered him smelled faintly of cedar and thyme, its edges frayed from decades of use. For the first time in months, he closed his eyes without fear that someone would drag him back into the streets. Clara did not ask questions. She simply placed a bowl of steaming soup in front of him, bread beside it, and let the silence speak for both of them. Ethan ate slowly, hands shaking, but each spoonful was an anchor, pulling him back into the possibility of safety. The house around him was old, the wallpaper peeling, the pipes groaning. Yet to Ethan it was a fortress against the cruelty of the world outside. Days folded into each other. In the mornings he swept Clara's porch, pushing leaves into neat piles while the autumn wind scattered them again. He climbed to the roof, patching leaks with clumsy hands, nails bent under the hammer, but determination steady. He carried groceries, stacked firewood, fetched water from the old pump, learning the rhythm of a household kept alive by effort rather than wealth. At night, Clara sat in her armchair knitting, the needles clicking softly like the heartbeat of the home. Ethan curled in the corner with books pulled from her shelves. Many were old, pages yellowed, but he devoured them. Some nights he discovered folded newspapers Clara had kept from the era of civil rights marches. Among faded photographs were images of men and women walking hand in hand, some of them same-sex couples who dared to appear in public when the world had yet to soften toward them. He looked up at Clara in disbelief. Her eyes, deep and steady, met his. She said in a voice both weary and tender, "The world can be cruel to those who are different, but you are not wrong for being yourself." The words pierced the silence he had carried all his life. Ethan broke, his face buried in his hands, tears soaking his palms. No one had ever said those words to him. No one had ever told him that his existence was not a mistake. Clara placed her knitting aside and rested her hand on his shoulder. The gesture was simple, yet it rebuilt what the blows of his father had tried to erase. Time in that small house was not measured by clocks, but by moments of quiet dignity. Ethan began to see Clara not as a stranger, but as family, the kind of family that does not demand conformity, but offers belonging. He carried wood without being asked, repaired broken steps, scrubbed floors. Each act was a silent thank you for the gift of being seen. But fear gnawed at him. He knew kindness could be punished by association. If his father searched for him, if neighbors whispered about a widow housing a runaway boy, Clara could suffer because of him. Before dawn one morning, Ethan stood in the doorway, watching Clara sleep in her chair with a half-finished scarf in her lap. He wanted to say thank you. He wanted to promise he would return, but the words stayed trapped in his throat. He left a folded blanket on the sofa, pulled the door open as gently as he could, and slipped into the early light. Clara stirred but did not rise. She watched the door close, her eyes glistening, and whispered into the silence, "Go, child, but remember you deserve to live free." That memory stayed with Ethan like an ember, glowing in the cold years ahead. The lesson was quiet yet unshakable. True family is found where there is understanding, and love becomes real not through blood, but through the courage to affirm another's right to exist. Time did not stop inside Clara Thomas's house, but it slowed. Seasons came and went, each one taking a little more strength from her body. The hands that once knit scarves without tiring now trembled when lifting a teacup. Her hair, once black and full, had turned white, and her back curved under the weight of years. She lived on the modest pension left after her husband's death, just enough to keep the lights on, barely enough to repair the cracks spreading across the walls of the home they had built together more than half a century ago. That house was more than timber and shingles. Every room held echoes of her life with him. The creak of the floorboards in the hallway still reminded her of his late-night pacing after long shifts at the factory. The garden, though now overgrown, carried the faint perfume of flowers he had planted for her in their youth. To Clara, the house was not just shelter. It was memory, promise, and love carved into every beam. But the world outside cared nothing for memory. One morning, a letter arrived, its envelope crisp and official. Inside were words colder than any winter draft. The city planned to seize her property. A new commercial complex, bright and profitable, was scheduled to rise where her home stood. She was given notice to vacate. No sentiment, no recognition of decades lived within those walls. Only a deadline. Clara's heart trembled, but she did not surrender quietly. She dressed in her best coat, though it hung loose on her thin frame, and made her way to the council chamber. Leaning heavily on her cane, she stood before a panel of officials who wore polished suits and detached expressions. Her voice shook but carried the weight of truth. "This is not just wood and brick. This is my home. This is my life story. The last piece of my husband I still hold." Her words hung in the air, fragile but firm. Yet the reply came like a blade. One councilman smirked, his tone clipped, efficient, dismissive. Progress does not wait for personal feelings. The city cannot be stalled by nostalgia. Laughter rippled quietly among a few, the sound cutting deeper than any gavel strike. Clara's shoulders sagged as she lowered herself into a seat. For the first time, she felt invisible, as if the years she had given to this community had dissolved into nothing. The chamber pressed on with its business, indifferent to the elderly woman whose eyes filled with tears. She sat there, small against the grand walls, her cane balanced across her lap, her voice silenced by the machinery of development. Then the doors at the back opened. The echo of polished shoes striking marble cut through the murmur of voices. Heads turned. A tall man stepped into the room, dressed in a dark suit, his presence commanding but not harsh. His gaze swept the chamber, but when it reached Clara, it softened with recognition. He was not just another official. He was the newly elected mayor. The officials straightened in their seats, sensing a shift. The room that had moments ago dismissed Clara with casual cruelty now held its breath. She blinked through her tears, staring at him, not yet understanding what this return meant, not yet knowing that the boy who once vanished from her sofa had grown into the man who now stood at the helm of the city. What Clara did not realize was that history had come full circle, and the fragile kindness she had offered on a stormy night would soon become the shield protecting her. The lesson in that moment was not yet spoken, but it lingered like a shadow ready to be revealed when society reduces lives to numbers and progress to profit. The true measure of a city lies in whether it remembers its people, especially the ones who once had nothing. The chamber fell silent as Ethan Monroe walked forward. He carried himself with the steady poise of a man who had endured storms far harsher than political debate. The air shifted, not with noise but with expectation, as if everyone sensed that something more than business would unfold. His eyes swept the room, measured and calm, but when they settled on Clara Thomas, there was no mistaking this flicker of tenderness that broke through his formal exterior. He did not sit. He remained standing, a figure both vulnerable and unyielding. His voice carried across the chamber, firm enough to command attention, soft enough to cut into the hearts of those listening. "This woman," he began, gesturing toward Clara, "is not just a name on a property deed. She is the reason I am alive." A murmur rippled through the seats. Some leaned forward, others shifted uncomfortably, unprepared for what sounded less like policy and more like confession. Ethan drew a breath, his eyes never leaving Clara. Years ago, a boy was left to freeze in the dark because the world could not accept that he was different, because his father raised his fists instead of his hands to protect, because being gay was treated as a shame instead of the truth it is. That boy had nowhere to go, nowhere to breathe freely. He would have vanished from this earth if not for one woman's mercy. The council sat motionless, not a cough, not a shuffle, only silence. Clara clutched her cane, tears glistening, her lips trembling as the truth she had carried quietly for decades was spoken aloud. Ethan's voice steadied, each word shaped by the weight of memory. "That boy was me, and this woman you are ready to cast aside opened her door and saved me. She gave me warmth when I was bruised, dignity when I was broken, and a reason to believe that life could be more than rejection." The admission cracked through the chamber like lightning. For a moment the walls that had echoed with arrogance seemed humbled by truth. Ethan turned to the officials, his gaze sharp now, unwavering. If progress means erasing the lives of those who built this city with their hands, then it is not progress at all. If we destroy the homes that hold the histories of our people, we are destroying our own identity. He lifted the document he had brought with him. "As mayor, I signed today a directive recognizing Clara Thomas's house as a protected historical landmark. Not only will her home remain standing, but a new community center will rise in her honor, carrying her name, serving the young and the lost, the ones the world too often discards." The room erupted. Applause thundered against the chamber walls. Some rose to their feet, others simply bowed their heads, ashamed of the mockery they had given minutes before. Clara struggled to stand, leaning heavily on her cane, her voice shaking as she whispered words meant only for Ethan, but caught by those closest. "My son, at last you live openly, proudly." The sight of an old woman rising to meet the boy she once sheltered brought more tears than speeches ever could. In that single moment, the chamber no longer looked like a place of politics. but a place where justice breathed. And buried within that moment was a truth as old as time. The strongest declarations are not written in laws or shouted from podiums. They are born from lived pain, spoken with honesty, and turned into protection for those still vulnerable. The Clara Thomas Community Center opened with sunlight streaming through tall windows, illuminating walls painted with colors of hope. Children ran across polished floors, their laughter echoing through halls that only weeks earlier had been blueprints. Volunteers stacked shelves with blankets, lined tables with food, and filled cabinets with books. The building pulsed with life, not just as a shelter, but as a declaration no one would be left to the streets simply for being different. Ethan Monroe visited often. He walked the corridors quietly, observing the faces of boys and girls who carried the same fear he once knew. Some sat clutching backpacks, their eyes darting as if expecting rejection. Others lingered by doors, unsure if they were truly welcome. Ethan recognized himself in each of them, the boy who once trembled under a hoodie too thin for the cold. He would kneel, speak softly, remind them without needing to explain, "You are safe here. You are not wrong for being who you are." Clara, though frailer now, attended the inauguration. Her cane tapped steadily as she moved through the rooms named in her honor. She saw her legacy not in plaques, but in the relief on young faces. When she stood at the ribbon cutting, tears rolled freely. The city cheered her, yet she whispered only to Ethan, "This house may crumble one day, but the love inside it will not." But the day of celebration carried an unexpected turn. As applause filled the main hall, a figure stepped forward from the crowd. His hair was silvered, his posture bent by age, but his eyes bore the unmistakable shadow of the man Ethan once fled from, his father. He came closer, face lined not only by time but by regret, and his voice cracked as he spoke. "I was wrong, all my life. I thought shame was stronger than love. I raised my fists instead of my heart, and I lost my son. Ethan, I see now you are my pride." The hall froze, conversations ceased, breaths caught. For many, it was the reunion they wished to witness, but Ethan felt the old wounds reopen. Each scar remembered in a flash, the nights of hiding, the sting of blows, the sound of cruel words. He looked at the man before him, then turned, reaching for Clara's hand. His voice was steady, resolute. "I already have a family, and she is standing beside me." His father broke, tears carving paths down weathered cheeks as he fell to his knees, but Clara's hand closed tighter around Ethan's. She whispered for him alone, "You have answered already." The hall understood. Family is not bound by blood, but by the ones who stand when the world abandons. Ethan had chosen, and in that choice lay freedom. That day left the city with a lesson carved deeper than policy or speeches. Forgiveness is not owed. Reconciliation cannot erase harm, and the truest home is found in love that accepts without condition. Now let me ask you, if you were Ethan, standing in front of the man who once cast you into the streets, would you accept him back into your life? Or would you stand firm beside the one who saved you? Or your showering thoughts below. And if stories like Ethan's move you, stories of pain turned into power, of rejection transformed into pride, make sure you subscribe to HeartStories, so you never miss the next journey that reminds us what family truly means.